Hey everyone, it is Wednesday Night Bible Study. Pastor Tim here with you, coming to you from your church building, Community Grace building. We're glad to have you with us. It is August 26th, and yesterday was August 25th. Pretty good, huh? And I know that because it was my 41st anniversary with Jan. So if you want to just in the comments say happy anniversary, Jan, how did you do that for 41 years? Whatever you want to say, just give a shout out to Jan. 41 years yesterday. And I can't tell you how we spent it because I don't know yet, even though I'm coming to you live. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do what we have been doing for a season now. We're going to dig a bit deeper into the sermon topic from this last weekend. So let me read for you. We're going through the Gospel of Mark. We're in chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, the story of the man with the withered hand. And I had a chance to preach on it this weekend. If you didn't see that, you might want to go back and catch the sermon. But we're going to go into a few more details together with this story. So here's how the story goes. Again, Jesus entered the synagogue, and a man was there who had a withered hand. They watched him, as in Jesus' critics watched him, to see whether he would cure the man on the Sabbath so that they might accuse him. And Jesus said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come forward." And then he said to them, "Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save a life or to kill?" But they were silent. He looked around at them and with anger. He was grieved at their hardness of heart, and he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against Jesus and how to destroy him. So we're going to look at that story again, a little bit deeper from a different perspective. Before we do that, I think Diane's going to somehow in some way search through her computer to find the band for us. They're going to come to you live through her computer. Here we go.
Heaven thundered, and the world was born. Life begins and ends in the dust you formed. Faith commanded, and the mountains moved.
I was watching that and thinking back, it seems like a lifetime ago now, but back the last weekend in March, we burned the mortgage on that house. We had spent the year prior paying off that mortgage. And that recording studio has always been important to us as a church. Most of you had never seen it before. You only heard us talk about it. And now it has become absolutely vital to our ministry. And you get to see it every week. And because of that recording studio, we're able to do our music videos to keep the quality up during this COVID time. So what a gift it has been to us, and of course to all of our tech people throughout these days, and our musicians. We sure appreciate them. All right, let's look at this story together. Mark chapter 3, 1 through 6. And let's start with this. Mark 3:1 starts out by saying, "Again, Jesus entered the synagogue." So let's talk about the synagogue a little bit. The synagogue was an important part of Jewish life. And it was also an important part of Jesus' life. We know that there are at least 10 examples in the Gospels of Jesus going to the synagogue to do important ministry. And the synagogue, which was the Jewish center of life, became an important key in spreading Christianity. Almost every time that Paul went to a new city to start proclaiming the good news of Jesus, he would start in the synagogue. And so the synagogue became one of the tools that God used to spread Christianity throughout the Roman world at that time. The word synagogue in Greek means many things, but assembly is one of them. In Hebrew, it means congregation. It can also mean the community of Israel. And that phrase, community of Israel or congregation, then attached itself to these local buildings called synagogues. Now, the synagogue was more than just a place of worship. It was a school where the boys would be taught the scriptures, not the girls, but the boys. It was a meeting place for a lot of different things, the community center. It was a courtroom. It was a place of prayer. And it was also then the place for worship. A typical synagogue was built, of course, with 4 walls. And 3 of the walls, 2 of the side walls and the back wall, had stone seats, all right? So they would be leveled out stone seats. And that's tended to be where the wealthy or the elite or the uppers in that community would sit. And then the floor usually was made out of packed dirt. And so the common people would sit there. They'd bring their blankets, they'd bring their rugs, and they would sit there on the floor. And so that would be kind of their place. And then the front, kind of like up here in the front of our worship center, the front had several different things. It would have the menorah. Many of you maybe think about the menorah around Christmas time or Hanukkah, the 7 candles. And that was a powerful story for the Jewish people back in 165, 163 A.D. The Greeks had come in, the Syrians had come in and taken over Jerusalem. They had defiled the temple in Jerusalem. And then there was the Maccabean revolt where the Jews rose up and revolted. And there was just enough oil for one day to keep the candle lit in the temple for one day, but it lasted 7. It's the miracle of the oil. And the Jews were able to defeat the Syrians, kick them out. They reclaimed the temple. They were able to cleanse the temple. And they always remember that day as Hanukkah. And that's what the menorah is for, the 7 days that the candles stayed lit, that there was enough oil. Also in front was a bench or a little chair seat carved out of stone. It was called the Moses seat. And that's where the person would sit who would read from Moses, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the Torah. And so it would be read from there. And then there'd be a small platform in the front, and that's where the preacher for the day generally would stand, sometimes sit, in order to deliver the message. And we know that there were several times when it references Jesus sitting down to preach, just like Pastor Tim does. And so the sermon would be given there, and it didn't always have to be the official preacher. It could be a lay leader, it could be someone else, but somebody who understood the scriptures. And so that gives you a little picture of the synagogue where Jesus was. We don't know exactly what city he's in this story, but he's in a synagogue. And we know it was the Sabbath day. For the Jews, the Sabbath day began Friday night as soon as they could see the first 3 stars in the sky. And as soon as they see the 3 stars in the sky, the Sabbath begins for 24 hours. Usually on Friday night, they would celebrate the Sabbath with the Sabbath meal. It would have been prepared beforehand, and each family would celebrate the meal, maybe bring in some neighbors, and they would have this family gathering over the sacred meal for the Sabbath to prepare themselves. And then on Saturday morning, they would head out and they would go to the synagogue for a service. Now, in some Jewish communities today, people will go to a Sabbath service on Friday night. Some might go on Saturday morning. But the Sabbath then would end on Saturday afternoon. So it's the Sabbath day, probably Saturday morning. And a man was there with a withered hand. They watched Jesus to see whether he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. Now, I talked a little bit about this in the sermon, that you couldn't fix things, but you could keep them from getting worse. I want to read, and this is a little longer read, but I want to read for you what some of the Sabbath restrictions were, just for you to get a sense. This comes from a man named William Barclay, not related to Charles, William Barclay, who was a theologian who wrote some great commentaries. He just had a special gift for getting into the cultural context. So I want to read a few things for you about the Sabbath, just to give a sense of what's going on here. It was the Sabbath day. All work was forbidden, and to heal was work. The Jewish law was definite and detailed about this. Medical attention could be given only if a life was in danger. To take some examples, a woman in childbirth might be helped on the Sabbath. I'm sure all of you moms are thinking, whew. An infection of the throat might be treated. If a wall fell on anyone, enough might be cleared away to see whether the person was dead or alive. Anyone found alive might be helped, but a dead body must be left until the next day. A fracture could not be attended to. Cold water might not be poured out on a sprained hand or foot. A cut finger might be bandaged, but not with ointment. Okay, you could keep it from getting worse, not getting better. That is to say that at most the injury could be kept from getting worse, it must not be made better. I just said that. Boy, that William Barclay, he's brilliant. He goes on, it is extraordinarily difficult for us to grasp this. The best way in which we can see the strict Orthodox view of the Sabbath is to remember that a strict Jew would not even defend his life on the Sabbath. In the Wars of the Maccabees, I talked about that just a bit earlier, when the Syrians came in and took over Israel and sacrificed pigs in the altar in Jerusalem, in the temple. In the Wars of the Maccabees, when resistance broke out, some of the Jewish rebels took refuge in caves. The Syrian soldiers pursued them. Josephus, the Jewish historian, tells us that the Syrians gave the Jews the chance to surrender, and the Jews would not. So the Syrians fought against them on the Sabbath day, and they burned them as they were in their caves without resistance and without so much as stopping up the entrances of the caves. The Jews refused to defend themselves on that day because they were not willing to break in upon the honor they owed to the Sabbath, even in such distress. Quote, for our law requires us to rest on that day. When Pompey, the Roman general, was besieging Jerusalem, the defenders took refuge in the temple precincts. Pompey proceeded to build a mound which would overlook them and from which he might bombard them. He knew the beliefs of the Jews, and he built on the Sabbath day, and the Jews lifted not one hand to defend themselves or hinder the building, although they knew that by their Sabbath inactivity they were signaling their own death warrant. The Romans, who had compulsory military service, had in the end to exempt the Jews from army service because no strict Jew would fight on the Sabbath. The Orthodox Jewish attitude to the Sabbath was completely rigid and unbending, and Jesus knew that. So that's the context. You don't work on the Sabbath. So this man's right hand is withered. We know that from Luke's account of this story. And we talked about in the sermon on the weekend that the right hand is the symbol for power and strength. It was the right hand that was used for bestowing greetings. We usually, even now, shake hands with the right hand. It was the hand that was used to bestow a blessing. It was the clean hand. So the Jews would always eat with their right hand, even if they're left-handed. They would always eat with the right hand because it's the clean hand, because the left hand, and I'll try to be as delicate as possible, was the unclean hand, and that was used to do unclean things like attend to bathroom needs. You can look it up on Google if you don't quite understand what I'm saying. So the left hand was sort of the dirty, gross hand. The right hand was the good hand. It was the hand of power. So that this man's hand was withered is not only that his hand is withered, but metaphorically he's lost his strength. He's lost his power. He is now less than a man. He has diminished his human potential. And so he is less than human, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. He has been dehumanized through this loss of his hand. So Jesus said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come forward." And then he said to the people in the congregation, "Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath? To save a life or to kill?" But they were silent. Jesus looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at their hardness of heart and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against Jesus how to destroy him. Now, in the context of the Jewish law, to heal this man would be work, because you can't make something better. This man is in no imminent danger of dying. So for Jesus to heal this man on the Sabbath is work, and therefore he is breaking the Sabbath. But Jesus is making a different kind of argument. Jesus is arguing that this man hasn't just lost his hand, he has lost his life. He's lost his ability to produce. He's lost his humanity. He has been emasculated. And so to heal this man isn't just to heal him, it's to save his life. It's to restore his humanity, to give him his life back, to raise him back to life. And so Jesus heals him and gives him his life back. So in the message, we focused a bit more on personal application, on how Jesus comes to rehumanize us as individuals. That Jesus comes to rehumanize you. And when Jesus says to you, "Stretch out your hand," he's saying, live because you're loved. You're valuable to me. You're worth dying for. Stretch out your hand, because no matter what the world says about you, no matter what your circumstances say, no matter what your brain is saying about you right now, Jesus says, you're created in the image of God. Jesus said, "You are my son, you're my daughter." Jesus said, "You matter." And Jesus says, "You are worth dying for." So when Jesus speaks to us, he rehumanizes us with grace and with love and forgiveness and mercy. He says, "You matter. You are fully human." What I want to do for a few moments is look a bit more globally. I talked a little bit at the end of the sermon last weekend on how we not only dehumanize individuals, but we dehumanize people groups. And that has certainly been the story here in the United States of America. Embedded into our storyline is a lie, is a myth that has dehumanized several different groups of people. But I want to just talk about this lie from the perspective of what we're facing right now in the United States of America. So back in 1619, the first African slaves were delivered to what would become the United States of America. Now, they were probably here before then, but that's the date that we look at it officially, when slaves were first delivered here. Now, this is going to seem obvious. Slavery was a barbaric practice, and everyone knew it even back then. Even those who supported slavery knew it was barbaric. And so in order to alleviate their guilt and their conscience, in order to justify the owning and the selling of other human beings, a lie was created. A myth was created, and it's the lie of race. And basically, this new storyline, this storyline of race says that people who have skin that is black-colored are inferior to people who have white skin. They are lazy, they are savages, they are less than human, and that for their own sake, we need to own them. We're helping them by owning them. Here's how Thomas Jefferson said it. Remember, Thomas Jefferson's the one who said that all men are created equal. Thomas Jefferson said that slavery could destroy our country because it is so morally wrong, and yet he owned over 600 slaves himself. Here's what Thomas Jefferson said about slaves and about black people. He said their inferiorities include a very strong and disagreeable odor. They require less sleep. Their griefs are transient, meaning short-lived. And not only in imagination are they dull, tasteless, and anomalous, but they are also in reason much inferior. It is not their condition then, but nature, he concludes, which has produced the distinction. And so even though in the end Jefferson knew that slavery was wrong, he still bought into this racist lie, this dehumanizing lie, that people of black-colored skin are inferior to people with white-colored skin. And this is a storyline that has been perpetuated in our culture to this very day. It didn't end with slavery. Remember that even in our Constitution, black people are considered only 4/5 human. Is that right? 3/5? All right. It's 3/5 or 4/5. Let's just say they're not fully human. All right? So after the emancipation of the slaves, that storyline of dehumanizing black people continued. So we added to the list when they were slaves, where they were inferior, they're lazy, they're lacking in intelligence. We kept all of that, but then we added to it. They're dangerous. They're a threat to property values. They're hypersexualized, and they lack in self-control. And so for several centuries, we codified these racist lies, these dehumanizing lies, into policies. Black codes, Jim Crow, redlining, law and order. And all of these policies were meant to keep that lie alive and official, that black people are inferior to white people simply based on the color of their skin. And that storyline is buried deep into our history, and that storyline is still haunting us to this day. It comes up over and over again because the storyline is not done yet. And so as we talked a little bit about this past weekend, in this story, Mark chapter 3, Jesus not only stands with dehumanized individuals, but he stands with dehumanized people groups. Jesus stands against anything or anyone who dehumanizes other groups of people. What angered Jesus in the synagogue that day was the lack of humanity from those in attendance and their inability to see their neighbors fully human as people worth saving. And that's the problem that we have in the United States of America today, is we still have these storylines that say the people whose color of skin is not white are inferior and need to be treated as such. And we have laws and policies still in place that keep that lie alive. And so to follow Jesus is to stand where Jesus stands. And Jesus stands with the man with the withered hand. Jesus stands with people of color. Jesus stands with the marginalized and with the outcast and with the poor and the dehumanized. And Jesus fights for them because Jesus stands for equality, justice, goodness, and humanity. And so to follow Jesus is to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, is to treat our neighbors with the same humanity that we demand we be treated with. To follow Jesus is to fight against systems and cultural lies and policies that dehumanize others. To see our neighbors as Jesus sees them, with grace, love, and esteem. To follow Jesus is to see all people as created in the image of God, and to fight for their humanity as individuals and as people groups. And as a community of grace, we stand where Jesus stands, on the side of all of those who have been dehumanized. And we will stand in solidarity with them, and we will fight with Jesus alongside of them to make sure that every single person in every area of our country is treated with dignity and respect, and that we create the policies and the laws that make equality a reality in our country. So that's Mark chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. And as you can see, when we do these sermons and these Bible studies, there are so many layers to them. And so as we close, let's have a word of prayer together, and we'll call it a night. God, it is good to spend some time in the Bible and to hear once again that you're a God of grace through Jesus, and that you come with this agenda, and that agenda is to free us from all those things that dehumanize us. In our own lives, it can be our sin, it can be our guilt, our shame, our brokenness, and that you also come to free those who, for whatever reason that had nothing to do with them, have been dehumanized because of the color of their skin, because of how much money they make, the language they speak, where they come from. And Jesus, we know that you stand with them, and where you stand, we want to stand. And so may we be Christians, may we be a church that stands where Jesus stands, in solidarity with all humanity, and treat them with dignity and respect, to see them as people that you died for. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, share this with your friends if you'd like. Tomorrow night, Tony and Lisa. Friday night, 6 o'clock, Pastor Kathleen and Josh and their kids. And again, as I said this weekend, they are boffo. They are blowing up the internet with their Faith 5. And then next Saturday and Sunday, we're going to worship together, and we'll look at the story of what it means to follow Jesus, the nutcase. See you then.